Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Programming by Stealth, and this is installment number 180, recorded May 24th, 2025. I'm your host, Allison Sheridan, and of course, I'm joined by your co-host, Bart Busschots. Hi, Bart. How are you?
I am very good, Allison. We are both wearing our wonderful 20 years of podcasting NosillaCast t-shirts. They're over at podfeet.com/shop or
That's
something.
right.
Oh, yeah, good,
Something
I
like
guess.
that. I think you got it right. Yeah, that's why it's designed that way. Those redirects are so you always know what it is.
Yeah, and they are gorgeous, by the way, folks. Lots of colors to choose from and nothing but the best. Cotton Bureau. They're very pleasing to wear.
Yeah, definitely high quality. I buy shirts from shows that I could care less whether I advertise for them, but I really like the way the shirts feel. So
Yeah, Clockwise. It's like they just have an amazing green shirt with a cool logo. It's like, I'll wear that with great pleasure.
I like my Clockwise shirt. I like my ATP shirts, but now it's time to buy Podfeet shirts.
Yes, right.
All right, but that's not the show we're talking about today. But I appreciate the free advertising, Bart.
Yeah, hey, it's genuinely nice. And they arrived this week because I'm the wrong side of the Atlantic, so they're a bit slower. Anyway, kind of related. So these are for styling me and for styling you. And what we're going to talk about today is styling our Jekyll websites. Okay, I stretched that a bit, but hey.
I like it.
So a Jekyll website, you write your content in Markdown, and then you convert that to HTML. Now, as you and I know from using Markdown editors, when you do that, the only HTML that comes out is the bit with your content in it. There is no website. There is just your content. So how does the other stuff get around your content? Right? That seems like an important piece.
Yeah.
And I did my best to minimize the magic sauce because I told you at the start, I can't possibly start from absolute zero. I have to ask you to take at least one thing on faith. And I did manage to keep it to one. And that one thing is how we have a stupendously basic skin around our content at the moment. So at the moment, the skin we have on our demo site, it incorporates Bootstrap so that we at least have Bootstrap making it not look like 1980. Because otherwise it'll be a serif font. I mean, Times or something. And it also has the Bootstrap JavaScript. So it's not completely unstyled, but it's pretty close. But I'm going to explain to you how the theme we have at the moment works, and more importantly, how Jekyll handles this concept of the display part of your website. And it's going to be two installments covering this sort of aspect of how to view your content. And then we're going to change tack completely into how you organize the content. So, the way I said at the very start of this, that if you work in a big organization, you want to separate the two hats of the person who designs the web page and the person who writes the content. And you should have people who know nothing about HTML be completely comfortable writing your content, and people who couldn't string two sentences together being completely confident creating the structure and layout of a site. And so we've very much been in that first mode, right? We've been talking about very nerdy tech stuff. And after this installment and the one after, we are switching modes completely because we'll actually have covered everything we need to cover in terms of the information we need to style our sites. Actually doing it, making it pretty, involves taste and stuff. This is where I fall down. But we will have taught you all of the tools with links to all the documentation, and then it's kind of down to your imagination. And I can't help with that. I'm the wrong person.
Unfortunately, when you tumble down the hill on that one, you're falling on me because I was already down there.
Right. Yeah, neither of us are designers, right?
No.
But yeah, so I guess that sort of puts it into context. So this is kind of why I was focusing. Why was it important to spend the entire previous installment on Liquid? And this is the bit where Liquid does 90% of its work. So you are free to use Liquid inside your content if it adds a little bit of convenience to you. But most of the time, you have been writing and reviewing show notes for Programming by Stealth for what, 5 years, 6 years? How long has this
Something
series
like
been
that.
going?
180 years worth.
A lot of episodes, right? And
Right.
how often have you had to write a Liquid tag?
Never.
Never. That's because the Liquid is all in the theme that you never see. Or rather, you
Okay.
can see. I don't hide it from you. But you don't need to go there because you're interested in proofreading my terrible English, fixing my grammar and stuff, which means you're writing in Markdown all the time.
I'm the
Well,
person who can string 2 sentences together.
yeah,
Your
right, exactly.
example.
Because I get 1.5 and then it goes, oh. So the Liquid lives most of its time not in the Markdown, but in creating the HTML that ends up around the Markdown-ified content. So we're going to spend a lot of time with Liquid in this installment and a lot of time with Liquid in the next installment, and then we're going to not really see Liquid anymore because actually it's quite a simple templating language and we're getting close to done with it. There's not much more to come. Okay, so you have lived a lot of your publishing existence in WordPress. So in your mind, a WordPress theme is a zip file which you extract into a specific folder called WP_themes, almost certainly. It's got to be WP something.
Right.
And you put it in there, and then you go into an admin page, and then you select the name of whatever that is you put in there, and you turn it on. And so in WordPress land, a theme is completely self-contained. In Jekyll land, it doesn't work like that. The theme isn't there is no _theme folder. The theme consists of a couple of parts. The most important is the layout. And so the layout says what HTML do we wrap around the content. And if that HTML needs some help because it needs some CSS or some JavaScript or some images, those are the assets. And those are just regular files as far as Jekyll is concerned. So they're not stuck into a special folder, they're just files in your website. So we talked a bit about
Right.
that in installment 178 in a section called Adding Static Files and Assets. So they're just files. And the other thing that we're going to talk about next installment is reusable snippets. So a theme is something you can have themes within themes, but a reusable snippet can just go anywhere. And so they are a completely different concept. And so I didn't want to muddy the waters by having two ideas in one show, especially because today's idea, it feels backwards to my brain. It may not feel backwards to your brain, but to my brain it feels backwards, and I struggle with this for so long, and I think I finally have it clear by writing these show notes,
Well,
which is great.
I have to say, so we are lucky this week that, again, I was able to carve out the time to read the show notes and study them and ask questions of Bart. I find the word layout difficult in this context. First of all, because it seems to have different meanings. There's layout when it's in code and layout when it's a word, and we'll get to where I'm confused. But one of the things that I never got from reading these show notes is that layout describes the layout of a page.
Yes.
Like there's a left sidebar, there's a nav bar, there's a whatever. We never get into that in this fairly long set of show notes. It's more like what's on the page, not where is it laid out on the page.
Well,
So it's a funny word.
Yes, I guess. But if you think about how a web page works, where do you define where the pieces go? It's in the HTML that comes before or after the content. So if you do a view source on your WordPress page, you're going to find a bunch of stuff to lay out your Podfeet logo and all of your stuff. Then you're going to find a bunch of HTML that is your wonderful show notes. And then you're going to find a bunch more HTML that puts a footer over here and a sidebar over there. So it is actually wrapping your content with more HTML, but it's all done for you by the PHP, so you don't think about it in the same way.
But I'm just saying, in Jekyll theming, the word layout doesn't mean the physical location of things within a screen, within a window.
Why doesn't it? It's the
Well, okay,
HTML.
nothing in this did that.
Okay, that's an interesting. Right, concepts
Maybe that
colliding.
is what it means, but since it never happened, I was like, okay, layout means some other word. But let's get into it, and don't worry, I'll be sure to stop you where I get confused on the
Right.
word.
So everything is about layouts, right? So it starts, you're writing markdown files like PBS 180.md. The very first thing Jekyll does is it takes that markdown and it turns it to HTML, which is easy. You now have HTML that starts with the first header on the page, contains a few paragraphs, and that's kind of it. So the next thing Jekyll has to do is it has to wrap that HTML of the content only with extra HTML to make it into a web page, right? Stick a header at the top. So we don't use a sidebar on PBS, but we hypothetically could. But all of that code for everything that isn't in the markdown file is the layout, and it gets wrapped around the content.
Okay.
So that is what layouts are. And they wrap around the content. And I keep using the word wrap because mentally you always have to keep thinking that it's layers. So the raw content is the first layer, and you wrap a layer around it. And if your layout wants a bit of help from another layout, it can say, please wrap me in another layer. And this is to stop you duplicating code. You don't want to have the same code all over the place, because then if you change your mind, oh, actually, I think I prefer that shade of blue. Oh, great, now I've got to change it in 10 places. Actually, no, because I have a layout that handles blog posts and adds in like the authored by and stuff, and a layout that handles pages because pages don't have a date. And then around that, I have a generic layout that handles the top of the page, the bottom of the page, and maybe the sidebar. But it's always wrapping. So I take my blog post and I wrap it with the blog bits, and then I wrap it all with the site's header, footer, etc. So I think of it as nesting dolls.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense in that context.
Yeah. So how does Jekyll know where to find the HTML? So we're going to wrap some HTML around our content. Where? Where does that HTML come from? And the answer is it comes from, at the very, very least, if you do nothing, if you don't go out of your way to tell it to do something else, it will use the default layout, which it goes and looks for in a file called default.html. And it will look for that in 3 places. And as soon as it finds it, it stops looking. So the first place it looks is in your actual input folder. So in the case of our demo repo, inside the docs folder, it looks for a folder called _layouts. So underscore means I'm a little hidden file that won't show up in the final output. And layouts tells you I am HTML for wrapping content. Think of it that way. Layout means HTML for wrapping content. And I am the default. So I'm default.html. That's the first place it tries to look.
Okay, so it starts in _layouts/default HTML.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second place it tries to look is in a feature we're going to ignore for now, but Jekyll has support for an external theme. So that means that you can have your layouts not in your website. They can be in another Git repository, or they can be sitting in a gem file, right? But we're not looking at that now because that's an advanced feature and you really don't need to worry about that. So we're going to say that exists. That's a thing, but that's for way later in the series. That is the way at the end we wrap up with cool extra features? That's one of those.
Okay, don't scare me. Let's skip over that one.
Yeah, exactly. Just know it's there. Don't worry about how it works. Just know that it's a thing. And then the last thing is, well, what happens if someone writes a Jekyll site and it has nothing in it but markdown files? So maybe I start a new Git repository. I just put a few markdown files and I do nothing else. Why doesn't it show me nothing? Well, the answer is because Jekyll itself has a default theme. It says, well, if literally if no one has provided me anything, I'm going to fall back on a default layout. And that happens to be a theme named Minima. So it's a minimal theme. And it actually has its own Git repository, which is linked in the show notes. And that is a really minimal theme.
This is where the show notes confused me. So you've got 3 places it's going to look, 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
All 3 of them say _layout/default.html. They all say the same thing. The first one says it's in the input folder, and our input folder is our docs folder. The second one says it's in a theme specified by the site configuration if you have a separate one, but we're not going to do that. But it doesn't tell me where the third one it is.
It is inside Jekyll. Inside Jekyll, there is a folder.
Hold up. What is inside Jekyll? What do you mean inside it?
So remember at the very, very, very first Jekyll series, we installed Jekyll. We said bundle install Jekyll. And it downloaded a bunch of Ruby code. And from that moment on, we could type bundler, run, serve, all that kind of stuff. We installed Jekyll. Jekyll is on your computer somewhere.
But you're saying it's in a folder called _layouts.
Yeah, so inside Jekyll, so somewhere in /user/local, whatever, wherever Ruby installed it, there is a folder called _layouts, which has your defaults in it. It is installed for you by Jekyll, and Jekyll knows where to find it. So from your point of view, if you do nothing, Minima's _layouts default.html is going to be available. If you want to see what it looks like, if you click on that link in the show notes, you can have a look at what it looks like in that Git repository. But that folder exists on your Mac, and Jekyll knows where it is.
Okay. I believe you. Actually, I'm checking with find any file for all the places that _layout/default.html is. But you get why that's a little bit of a confusing list because you say the same thing 3 times. But those same _layout/default.html is in 3 possibly different places.
Yeah,
at least
it
2
wants that
already
file.
exist.
Yeah. It really wants a file called _layout/default.html, and it will look in multiple folders.
Okay, when we go with the starting point file that we can download from the show notes, _layout/default.html already existed in docs. Is that because you created it for us?
That's the magic sauce. Remember I said, this is some magic sauce, that layouts folder. Copy it for now. I will explain it later. Hello.
So you wrote that?
Yes, I wrote that.
You wrote that?
Yes.
That's the end. Yes. Okay. All right. Got it.
Yes. Okay. So the absolute... Okay, right. Let me back up 1 second. So a layout wraps the content. So we write some HTML that's going to go before and after the content. Well, how does Jekyll know where in this HTML file it should put the content? The answer is it uses Liquid, and the variable in Liquid that contains your content is called content. So in that HTML file, you tell Jekyll, put my content here by saying curly curly content, close curly, close curly. And it will inject the content there. So the simplest possible layout is open an HTML tag, open a body tag, curly curly, content, close curly, close the body, close the HTML. That is not a very exciting layout, but that is a valid HTML page, and it will work.
Okay.
Okay. So obviously you want to be able to do more than that. So we're going to look at making our default a little bit nicer, but the other important thing is that you don't have to use the same layout on every single page. I've already hinted at the fact that when you write a blog post, say on WordPress, it looks a little bit different to a page in WordPress. And when we move on in 3 weeks' time, 3 installments' time to look at how different types of content are handled in Jekyll, we are going to be writing different types of content. We're going to want different layouts for our different types of content. So how does Jekyll know For example, in a PBS installment, there are magic links that get added at the bottom to go to the next installment and the previous installment. But when you go to the About page where it gives the link to your website and to mine, it doesn't have that. How does it know? Well, the answer is it's using a different layout. So there's a special layout for installments.
Okay. That makes sense.
And so you can have many different layouts. And a very, very common thing to want to do is to have a special layout for the homepage. Like you go to a website, they have this amazing homepage with a giant big jumbotron and stuff. And then every other page is different, right? Actually, I think Podfeed has
Yes.
a homepage and then it
Right.
has everything else. And so
Right.
again, that's a different layout. So in Jekyll land, you have a layout for the homepage and then your default layout would cover everything else. So how do I tell Jekyll I want to be this type of page? So the most direct thing you can do is in your front matter, you can say layout : and the name of the layout you want. So if you make a special layout called waffles that puts a square grid on every page, you could put at the top of your markdown file, -- layout : waffles, close your dashes to end your front matter, start typing your markdown, and then your waffle layout would get applied to that markdown file when it gets converted to HTML. So that is the most direct way. You just tell it, use that one. You can
Makes sense.
also,
And again, the front matter is the YAML, right?
bing, bing, bing. There's the metadata sitting at the top of your content. The next way you do it is you make your life easier and you add it to the config file. For now, until 3 weeks from now, I'm going to tell you to put a pin in that. But you will have noticed that you have never typed layout : at the top of a PBS segment or installment. And yet magically they look different to the PBS homepage. And that's because the config file says installments use this special layout, which adds the fancy magic links at the bottom and stuff.
But we aren't going to learn that today.
Not today. But again, I want you to know it's possible. So just know that it is a thing one can do. And if you don't do either of those things, it goes back to the default. It says, okay, I'll just use default.html. You haven't told me to do anything else. I'll use the default. Okay.
Good.
Right. So there is one more heavy lift and then we're into easy stuff. And that's the fact that you can wrap one layout inside another. So how do you do that? And this is the bit I rewrote completely after my first attempt at explaining it to you terribly. So Russian nesting dolls is the best way to go. And the way I have figured out in my own head, not to confuse myself, is that everything starts with your content, because Jekyll's job in life is to be a content management system. So whatever you're doing, it must start at the content. And so the first wrapping, the very, very, very inner doll is your markdown converted to HTML. And then your first wrapping is the layout specified by that page. So either in the front matter, the config file, or the default. And then at that point in time, you've handed responsibility to the chosen layout. If that layout wants help, if that layout says, I'm just going to add a little bit at the top and a little bit at the bottom, and then I'm going to hand myself over to the default, it's that layout's job to make that decision. And so that's how the nesting happens. You just say, I want this to be the person, the layout responsible. And if that layout wants help, it's up to that layout to ask for that help. So you, as a content author, don't have to worry about how it's nested. It's only the person writing the layout who thinks, I'm not going to duplicate my time and effort here. I'm going to write a little bit at the top, a little bit at the bottom, and then just tell the default layout to do the rest. Does that make sense as a concept?
I think so. Yeah.
And the way the person writing the layout does that is they add front matter to the HTML file. And in their HTML file, their front matter says layout : whoever I want to help me. So we're going to do a worked example to show this in action, but that's how it works. And so you can wrap a nesting doll around your content, and that nesting doll can ask to be wrapped by another doll, and that doll can be asked to be wrapped by another doll, and it works out like that.
But you don't end up with layout colon and 4 different nests within one markdown file.
No. So the markdown file just says, I want to be wrapped by that guy. And then if that guy decides that he wants to be wrapped, he chooses to specify that in his YAML front matter.
So the default.html could specify wrap me in a different layout?
It could. It absolutely could. Now, usually default is kind of the one that goes as the outer doll.
As the outer doll? I thought it was the inner doll.
No. So the very, very inner doll is your markdown, right? So you write markdown, right? It's all about the markdown, right? So you start by writing the show notes in markdown. Jekyll turns those to HTML. So you now have a bare piece of HTML. That is the inner doll. If you don't, in your front matter, in your markdown file, if you don't say anything, you will get wrapped by the default theme or whatever it said in the config. And you don't care anymore, right? You are the author. You just said, I am an installment. Wrap me in whatever the heck makes an installment look pretty. Jekyll will then go and load the layout file, say installment.html, that will do whatever needs to be done. So in the case of PBS show notes, it adds those fancy buttons at the bottom. And then I could have duplicated everything in the default layout for the PBS website in that layout file for installments, but I didn't because that would be ugly. So in the layout for installment, I chose to tell the installment layout that it wants to be wrapped by the default. So at the top of installment.html, it says layout : default. And then it gets wrapped in the default, which puts the blue banner across the top, the blue footer at the bottom, the nav bar, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So to try to say it in many fewer words.
Please.
If I've got some content, it turns into HTML, its markdown turns into HTML. I tell it I want to wrap it by waffles. Then in the waffles.html layout, it can call the pancakes.html layout, which can call the default.
Bing, bing, bing.
But so the layout isn't just in the markdown file. It's also in all of the layouts that nest it.
Yes, exactly.
That's the piece I was missing. Okay.
Okay, so I keep on teasing our worked example. I promise we are going there. But before we do, these layouts are full of liquid. And obviously the liquid we need to use the liquid to insert things. And so the first thing I want to have a talk to you about is liquid variables. Because they're the things we're going to stick into our layouts using liquid objects, which we know are terribly named, and we're not happy with the liquid people for that, and the liquid tags, which we talked about last time.
But clarify for me again, variables versus objects versus tags. Which one's which?
Okay.
Like the 2 squiggly brackets around content. That was variables, right? No?
Okay. Ish. So the curly says, I want to insert something. I am a placeholder. And that act of being a placeholder, for reasons I will never fathom, the Jekyll designers call an object. So when you hear a Jekyll object, just think placeholder. What goes into the placeholder is the variable.
Oh, okay. Maybe. Okay. Then what's a tag again?
If for flow of control. So they're %. So %, for blah in list of pages, %, if something, end if.
For loops, you mean?
Loops, conditionals.
Okay. I promise to ask you this every time you say it because this
Please.
is not sinking in. Those words don't mean. How is a tag an if or a loop? That's crazy. Okay.
I did, yeah.
Not your fault.
Sorry.
You didn't name it. But no fair saying, go read. I told you already in 179 because that doesn't make it stick.
No, but I did want to say to the listeners that there is a link in the show notes to in the previous installment because otherwise I know this won't sink in because it's a terrible name and terrible names don't stick.
And they also call variables dictionaries, right?
Again, ish, right? A variable could be a string, or a variable could be a list, or a variable could be a dictionary. It just so happens that Jekyll loves using dictionaries. So almost all of these variables are dictionaries, but the content variable is a string. It's a big load of HTML.
Wait, you just said the opposite of what your show notes say. Your show notes say Jekyll uses dictionaries for all the variables. You just said the variables are all dictionaries. Those are not necessarily the same thing.
I might tweak the show notes, but so Jekyll provides a bunch of liquid variables, and the Jekyll provided variables are dictionaries with the one exception of content, which is a string, but all the rest of them are dictionaries in Jekyll's universe. Jekyll loves dictionaries.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm trying to be clear, but the
no,
liquid
I know
people didn't help.
Yeah. And what do we use these variables for one more time?
Okay, so the mustaches, I'm going to just call them mustaches, right? They're a different language completely, but I'm just going to call them mustaches. Okay. Those are placeholders for something. The something is information that is made available to us as designers of our layout. So it could be the list of pages, right? If we want to have a nav bar that lists all the pages on our website, well, where does it get the list of pages? The answer is from the variables. If we say have a site title, how do we insert that title from our config file into our web page? Well, it comes from a variable. A page has a title. How do we get that title? It's in a variable.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah, so content is the variable that holds the markdown converted to HTML, so it's a giant big string. That's an easy one. Layout is a variable that tells us information from inside the layout file, so the HTML file. So if you put front matter at the top of that layout file, that front matter is available to you as a variable called layout dot whatever you called it in the front matter. So imagine you want to make, let's say you have a favorite color and you just want to name it once at the top of your file and then use it loads of times in your file. You could make a variable called my favorite color, put in the color, and then reference it all the way throughout your theme using mustaches. Listeners, that's the wrong word, but I'm just going to keep saying it.
So this is the sentence in the show notes where my head exploded. Layout, and you've got it as a code block. Layout provides access to any front matter defined within the layout itself. That's self-referential. I don't know that, right?
Okay, so let us say you're using the default layout. So you're in a file named default.html. And at the top of that file, you put 3 dashes to start some front matter. And then you put dessert : waffles, breakfast : muesli. And then you close your 3 dashes. There now exists a variable you can use in your mustaches called layout, which is a dictionary that contains the key dessert with the value waffles. So you could say curly layout.breakfast and it would print muesli. And then you could say curly layout.dessert and it would print waffles.
So layout is the name of a file. No, layouts is the folder name. Then we've got an HTML file that is called a layout.
Mm-hmm.
But then you say defined within the layout itself. What is the layout in that third time we use the word?
So the HTML file is a layout.
Yes?
It is described by a variable named layout.
Sure.
Okay, so Jekyll likes to do this. It names the variable after the thing it pretends to be. So when you are turning some markdown into an HTML file, there is always the original markdown, right? That is the point of these layouts. So that original piece of markdown is called the page, and it is represented by a variable called page.
Okay.
And so if in the markdown file you say title : waffles, then inside your layout, you can say page.title and it will be waffles.
I think where I got confused, I've just opened a file. I'm cheating. I'm
Great.
opening a file in the end condition of where we're going to get in our worked example, and the layout file has more in it than front matter. I thought all that was in the layout files was the front matter. It's actually saying, I'm going to put an H2 tag here, and I'm going to put page names here, and I'm going to put it is an HTML file of stuff.
Correct.
I thought it was just calling the other layouts. I thought it was only front matter, calling the next one, doing the nesting. There's stuff in there.
Yes. It is doing both of those jobs.
Okay. I think that's where I got stuck. All right.
And then the last variable represents the entire website. So when Jekyll is reading your input folder, it says, how many markdown files are there? Oh, great, there's 20 of them. I'm going to make a list called pages, so site.pages, and I'm going to put all of your files in there. So if someone wants to do a drop-down menu, they have a list of all of the pages that exist called site.pages. There's also site.title for the title of the whole website. And so the site dictionary represents the entire website.
That actually makes sense. I'm with you.
Great. Good. And then our last friends. So inside our mustaches, I'm going to keep wrongly calling them because it helps you and probably every listener. Inside our liquid objects, which we're calling mustaches, we take our piece of information and then we get to filter it to tweak it a little bit on the way out. And so I already mentioned last time that a very, very important filter is relative_URL because it handles the fact that the URL format can be different. When you're testing on your local server, it's just 127.0.0.1:4000 / and then whatever the name of your file is. But if you're working on GitHub, it's username.github.io/repository name/. So that extra bit would break every link. Well, you don't have to worry about it. You just say, yeah, take this URL, filter it through relative URL, and just do the right thing. So you always want to do that one.
All right.
If you're building out like a URL that specifies a query string, you have to escape spaces become pluses, commas become something like % to something. All of these, like every special
spaces
character
are %20.
They can be either, yeah. They can be 20 or plus. And every other special character is a % and then 2 pieces of hex. I used to know them. I don't know them anymore. But if you need to escape those, you can use URI escape to escape an entire URL at once. Just give it the whole URL and let it figure it all out. Or if you're only working with a small piece, you can give it CGI escape to just fix that little piece. The other thing you might have, right? Imagine that you have a little bit of front matter somewhere and you want to have some markdown in the front matter and you don't want the markdown to not get turned to HTML. Well, you can do that afterwards with the markdownify filter. You just give it a string of markdown and it will make HTML for you. from any string of Markdown. It's cool.
So Markdownify doesn't mean turn it into Markdown. It means take Markdown, turn it into HTML because it's backwards. That's nice.
It is. That's why I put it in bold, because I read it in the list of, and I went, why would I want to turn something into Markdown? And then I read the notes, or I read the docs, and the docs were like, converting Markdown to HTML. And I was like, I would have called that HTMLify, but okay, what do I know?
Oh, and that's fun to say.
It is. The other one is normalize white space, right? If you end up concatenating a bunch of strings together, you could end up with like 3 spaces at the front of something, or someone gave you a text file that was tabbed at the start of every line. And so the spaces shouldn't be there. The tabs shouldn't be there. You can just say normalize white space, and it just turns all white space into a single space. So it doesn't matter how messed up it was.
How is somebody giving me a file that would have white space in it? I don't follow
Well, they
that.
could, for example, the front matter would be one place you could end up with that. The other thing that we haven't met yet, because it's next week's topic, is reusable snippets. If they give you a snippet of TXT file or something that you try to load in, or maybe you're loading some data from a JSON file or something, and it has a whole bunch of stupid spaces in it, like, data can be dirty. Data can be dirty.
I didn't have a feeling for a use case of where anyone would give me any file ever.
Jekyll can read in text files and stuff, which are then available through the site variable. So you could, yeah.
Okay.
The other one is kind of nice. So in WordPress, this just happens by magic. It's a setting deep in your settings. So you type plain old quotes that are on your keyboard, right? And they're vertical. But when you see them on your WordPress blog, there's like the ones that start a word are curved one way, and the ones that end are curved the other way. And they're different
Smart
glyphs. Yeah, like under the hood, they're like, God knows what they are, %, who knows? And WordPress does that automatically. They're called smart quotes. So the filter Smartify will add smart quotes to anything you're sticking in through a mustache. The other cool one is array to sentence. So imagine you have a list of, say, we're going to be using tags in 3 weeks' time or so. So imagine you have a list of tags in an array and you want to write them in nice English. This post is tagged with waffles, pancakes. Well, you don't want to say waffles, pancakes, muesli. You want to say waffles, pancakes, and muesli. So array to sentence will default to an and on the end. It'll comma them nicely and stick an and on the end with the Oxford comma. Good Jekyll people. But if you give it an argument, you can have any word you like. So you could have an or coming on the end if you give it the argument or. So it's very handy. The other very useful one is sort. So imagine you have a loop to loop over, say, every post with the tag waffles. Well, what if you want them in reverse chronological order or something? You're going to need to sort them. So the sort filter lets you sort based on whatever criteria you want. And sample is really cool. So you go to a web page and they have like a random featured image or something. Sample takes a list and just picks one. And so every time you recreate your Jekyll site, it'll pick a different one. So it won't be random every time the page loads, but it'll be random every time you add some new content or whatever that the site rebuilds. It'll be different. So that gives you a little bit of dynamism? Dynamism? Yeah, one of those words. And then the last one is one that I'm sorry to say we're going to become friends with, inspect. It is for debugging a variable. What on earth is in site.whatever? Just pipe it to inspect and it will put it into a plain text that you can then stick into an HTML comment or something. So then if you do a view source on the output, you'll see what was in that variable. So
why are you sorry about that?
Well, it's very nerdy. I wish I never needed to debug, but in reality, I need to debug. So inspect is how you do that. Okay. Right, that's it. I'm not going to teach you anything new anymore. That is all the learning. Now I'm going to try consolidate it for you with worked examples. So the first worked example is what I have been dying to do for ages. It is removing the magic sauce. we are going to explain how our website is currently having a working layout. And the answer is because I gave you a file that I told you to save called _layouts/default.html. And that file is something that I wrote, and it does very little. It does the standard Bootstrap 5. It loads in the compiled Bootstrap CSS, and it loads in the bundled Bootstrap JavaScript. That's pretty much all it does. So let's look at that file. It is a whopping 15 lines long. And it starts off with the standard HTML5 doc type, open the HTML tag, open the head tag, metadata saying we're UTF-8. The viewport is required by Bootstrap. It's in the docs, so copy it in. It says the title. So that's what you see in the tab bar or the top of the window if you're using a browser with only one tab. Bless you. So it sets that to the mustache, as we're calling it, the liquid object page.title, followed by the pipe symbol, followed by another mustache, site.title. And indeed, if you load up our sample and look at it, it says, home, pipe, demo, demo Jekyll site? Or something like that.
Right. That's very readable.
Yes, it is. The next thing we do then is we load our CSS, which we do by a link tag. And here we have a mustache, which is a URL to our CSS file. So we have to pipe that through the relative URL filter. So we say curly, curly, the string, so inside quotation marks of what the file we want. And then we pipe that string to relative URL to make sure that it works both on our local test machine and that it works when we run it to real GitHub.
Oh, okay. Because you've actually put the minimized JS for Bootstrap in the assets folder.
Yes, exactly.
So you're carrying it with us.
Correct.
Not calling it from a CDN.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's the script tag at the bottom does exactly the same. Correct. So again, to relative URL. So we have the CSS in the head and the script at the bottom.
Okay, got it.
And then we open the body of our HTML page. And then we have a main tag, and then it has a Bootstrap class called container, and it says a PT of 3, so padding top of 3, so that our content doesn't whack its head off the top of the browser bar. And then we have the mustache, as we're wrongly calling it, to say inject the converted markdown here. So curly, curly, content, close curly, close curly. Close the main, include the script, close the body, close the HTML tag. So we are wrapping our markdown converted to HTML with this HTML. So you see why I've been so keen on the word wrap, right? Because everything is about wrapping it around that content mustache.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So so some things to draw your attention to. So how did it know what the page's title was? Well, if you go to, say, about.md, at the top of about.md, it says start our front matter, title, about, end our front matter. So that's where the title comes from. That's in the markdown file, and it's called title. Therefore, it goes page.title.
And new page because?
It's in the markdown file. The front matter of the markdown file is page, because the markdown that I am wrapping is the page.
What?
Okay, this same layout handles every single page on our test site. So
how does it know it's a page?
Okay,
Is
let's
the file
step back
called
a little.
page?
No. Okay, so your entire website is a collection of markdown files.
Mm-hmm.
Jekyll's job is to turn each markdown file into an HTML file. So Jekyll says, I am making a page out of every markdown file. So Jekyll chooses to call each markup file the page. So
So
while
every markdown file, no matter whether it's the home page or an index page or whatever it is, it's always called a page. So if
correct.
you've got a markdown file, it is page, and page.title is in the YAML that says title : about.
Bing, bing, bing.
Huh. Okay.
So basically, whenever you see page, think the current markdown file.
Okay.
The other thing we make use of is site.title. So where did that come from? Well, inside underscore config.yml is where we define our site's configuration, and in there you will find the YAML title : pbs Jekyll demo site, because everything that in that config file is site : along with all of the metadata that Jekyll discovered.
So any page and its layout, no matter how many nested dolls it's been through, is still defined in the layout underscore layout something.html. But the site itself is in underscore config.yaml.
The variable site tells you what's in the config. So the layout is always being used to render a page right now. So think of it as a giant big loop, right? If you have a website with 3 pages, your layout gets done 3 times. We start with file 1 that markdown. We apply its layout. When we're doing that, then page is file 1 that markdown. The site is still the site. The layout is still the layout. Then we do page 2. Now, page is page 2, but the site is still the site, the layout is still the layout. Then we do page 3. The site is still the site, the layout is still the layout, but the page is now page 3.
That's not at all what I was asking.
Oh.
The site is defined in underscore config.yml, not in one of these layouts.
Yes.
That's what I was saying. Okay. All right.
Okay. We mentioned many installments ago that Bootstrap, we are compiling Bootstrap from Sass, which we both agreed was a cool name, into CSS. And Bootstrap does that conversion for us. I am mentioning the fact that if you go look in the docs folder, you will find a file named assets/css/style.scss. But when you look in my layout file, it says link rel equals style sheet href equals assets css style.css. Have I done a typo? No, I have not. Jekyll has compiled the Sass file into CSS. So I need to include the CSS file. I'm just drawing attention to that in case anyone thinks I typoed or if I've confused anyone.
I'm not confused except for where did you say this is written? This is inside.
So
Where
inside
did you type
our
this?
default.html on line 7, I referenced the style sheet.
Ah, gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. And that's it. And I think that layout is now not magic sauce anymore.
Not nearly as much.
Okay,
I hope
good.
everybody understands. I spent 2.5 hours studying these show notes beforehand. I'm not coming in blind.
Yes. And this is, right, you very rightly said to me, Bart, you haven't said a challenge yet. And it's kind of because I forgot. But it's with very good reason there's a challenge coming up in a few minutes here because you need to stop just reading it and doing, because with the doing, I am hoping the pennies that are floating will come crashing down.
Okay.
So we have one more worked example because this is sort of the magic bit where we get to use a different layout for different pages. So right now on our demo site, every page uses the same layout, our default layout, because that's the only layout that exists in that _layouts folder. But it's very normal for your homepage to be different. So what we want to do is add a special layout for the homepage. So right now in the homepages file, we have a markdown image for this giant big logo. Then we have some text. Then we have a bunch of liquid code for printing the list of web pages. That's not content, is it? That bunch of liquid shouldn't be in our content. That should be in our layout. And that giant big banner is really part of our theming. That should be in our layout. And the only thing that should be in the actual markdown file is the text, right? It's a content management system. Why am I polluting my markdown file with all this other stuff? So let's fix that. Let's make a special layout for the front page. Its only job in life is going to be to make this front page be special. So the first thing we're going to do is the easiest thing. We're going to go into index.md and delete all the stuff that we think shouldn't be there, right? So the whole file becomes just 6 lines of code, a little bit of front matter that says title home, and then our 2 paragraphs of text, and we throw all the rest away. And briefly, our website looks terrible because our front page has just lost its big banner and it's all gone. But don't worry, we're going to put it back. The next thing I'd like you to do is also easy. That giant big image is starting off sitting in the illustrations folder, but it's going to become part of our theming, so it is now an asset. So just pick it up and move it to docs/assets. No need to rename it, just move it.
Got it.
Now it's all in the right place. Our site still looks like poop, by the way. We haven't made it look any better yet. So the next thing we're going to do is make a layout for the front page. So we're going to make a new file. It is a layout, so it's going to go in the _layouts folder. And we want it to be named front page. So it's frontpage.html.
Not front_page.html?
Yes, technically that's what I am typing. I hate saying the underscores. I should, because people can't see what I'm not saying.
Wait, can't see what I'm not saying, right?
Right. Yeah, it makes sort of sense.
All
right.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to let you cheat and see the whole finished product, and then I'm going to describe each piece. So our whole custom layout is only 16 lines. So that's the first thing to say. It starts off by saying, I want help from the default layout. I'm not going to duplicate the stuff in the default layout. So it starts off by saying, my front matter is layout:default.
So that's, we've nested.
We've nested straight away. Because all we want to do is add the fancy pants bits that make the home page different to every other page. So the first thing that makes the home page different is that it gets this giant big image. So the next thing in this layout is an HTML image tag, img src equals. Again, we have to run the string of where the file is through the relative URL filter so it works everywhere. We are good people who do accessibility, so it has an alt tag. Mm-hmm. And we are living in Bootstrap universe, so we make it a fluid image so that when we stick it on our phone, it doesn't scroll 20 million miles, it just shrinks.
Okay.
Then we put in the placeholder for the actual content of the markdown file. So curly, curly, content, curly, curly.
So the way it knows which content is this layout, front_page.html, is only called by the page that is the front page content.
Yes, that is how it is going to work.
Okay.
Yes.
Got you. All right.
Then we do our list of pages. We say h2 sitemap, open an UL, which is an unordered list. And then we have one of these YAML not YAML, Jesus. Liquid. One of these liquid tags you don't like the name of. And we're going to say, make me a new list, which we're going to name list_pages. We're going to start off with all the pages that exist in the website, which are in site.html. Then we're going to send them through the filter that basically says, give me all of the ones where their title is not home, because I don't want the home page in the list. So this is copied and pasted from the worked example at the end of the last installment. So
Okay, that's where we did assign list_pages to be site.html_pages. Yeah, I don't know how that syntax is going to get cemented. I'm going to interrupt right here because I know I'm going to ask the question eventually. You've given us lots of great links to documentation. Which one of them tells us this syntax?
So
of how to do tags. Is it called tags? Is it
they are
listed
called
under
tags. Yes, I'm being very careful to use the jargon, even if I
Right.
think it's silly jargon, so that you can ask ChatGPT, tell me how a liquid tag works.
Well, I was even going to look in your documentation, but I know you were so good. I remember noticing, oh, there's the documentation. Great. We got it here. We've got the core liquid docs. We've got extensions to liquid. We got a lot of links, but I don't know which one to look in to find, say, the syntax for tags.
So in the liquid docs, in the blue sidebar, there's a section called tags, and it gives you 4 pages about the different tags.
Which liquid docs? You have lots of liquid docs. The core liquid docs?
Core liquid docs.
Okay, not the Jekyll extensions to liquid.
If you start at the Jekyll extensions to liquid, it will tell you, I am in addition to, and it will link you to the other docs. And so you look at the Jekyll stuff and you won't find what you want, because in the case of something as generic as a sign, it will be in the core docs.
You gave me where to start. Thank you.
Yes. If it helps, when I'm writing the show notes, I always start on the Jekyll docs. And then if Jekyll links me out, I go, sir, yes, sir. And off I go.
Okay.
Right. So again, this is copied and pasted from last installment. So we then have a liquid 4 tag that says, for every page in the list of pages, I would like a list item with an ahref, where I'm going to take the URL of the page shoved through relative URL. And then inside my A tag, I'm going to have the title of the page. And then I'm going to close my list item. And then because liquid for loops are cool, there is an else statement or an else tag, which says, what should I do if there are no pages in this website? And it will print out a list item that says, no pages yet. And then it ends the loop.
Okay.
And so all we've put in here is the extra stuff that makes the homepage special. And then we say with our layout :default at the top, and stick that HTML stuff for Bootstrap at the top and the script for Bootstrap at the bottom from the defaults, please.
Yeah.
And so it all works.
Starting to get it. All right.
So we save this and our website still looks like poop because we have one piece left to do. We need to go back to index.md and tell it to please use the now existing front page layout. So we now in index.md, we say layout : front_page. Ta-da! Okay. And now the website isn't poop.
So that's applying the second nest.
Yes.
Okay. It's amazing how many questions I managed to ask in what was 16 lines.
But they're dense, right? That's the thing with this liquid stuff. It's dense. There's a lot happening in those 16 lines.
Yeah.
I have now filled your brain. I may have slightly overfilled your brain. I found it very hard to judge what was too much or too little to get into this installment.
Yeah, we're under an hour, so I think it was the right amount, but I'm really glad I read it for 2.5 hours first.
Yeah, sorry. What I forgot mentally was that you and I spent half an hour not recording a podcast and admiring each other's t-shirts. Yeah, okay, so we
That's why
haven't
you
been at
look
it
at
an
the
hour and a
clock.
half. Yeah,
No,
sorry. Phew. Okay. So you very, very rightly told me at the end of the last installment, we need to start doing challenges here or none of this is going to stick. And now I think is a perfect time to start doing that because there is no magic sauce left. So nothing in our demo site doesn't match something in the show notes somewhere, which I'm not saying that makes it easy. So on the one hand, I've gone ahead and I've done this challenge and it's about 16 lines of code in total. But I expect it will take a lot more time than you would think for 16 lines of code because this is your first piece of Jekyll solo. And
right.
it's going to
I think
take a little bit of work.
I described it to you as I can read some French left over from my 4 years of French in high school, but I couldn't construct a sentence if you held a gun to my head. So I can read your tags and tell what you probably meant, but I couldn't tell you where the percent sign in the squirrely bracket goes and things like that. So
Yeah. So, like I say, on the one hand, this challenge is not huge. And so someone who's good at Jekyll will look at it and go, that's a challenge. But I genuinely expect it will be a challenge. But when the pennies drop, it'll be very fulfilling.
I have a feeling this is simple in the end game, but it doesn't feel like it right at this moment. But I do
Correct.
appreciate, I know I hammer a lot about the terminology, but I have learned that because you make us use the correct terminology, that's how come we can find things in the docs. But I may go to my grave not knowing which one of these ones are which.
Alison, if I told you that I keep the core liquid docs open because the core liquid docs in that blue sidebar use the right words. And then I
Okay.
just remind myself, what's the right word again? Oh yeah, that's the right word. Because
Okay, good.
I'm at the stage where the syntax makes sense to me, but I can't put the word to the syntax, where you're at the stage where you have a word and you don't know what syntax goes in it. But either way, it's the same connection.
Right, right.
Right, okay, what is our challenge? So our default layout is very primitive. Right? It doesn't even have a navigation bar. Like, what website doesn't have a nav bar? It's like one of the first things we learned when we were doing Bootstrap was nav bars. So the challenge is simply add a nav bar. So we want to have every page have a nav bar at the top.
So we might need to add more, or I guess we have more than one page, don't we? Do we have more than one
We
page?
do. We have about.md, we have links.md, and we have index.md, if memory serves.
Okay. Okay. And we want the nav bar to be on index?
I want the nav bar to be on every page.
Oh, look at you. All right. I'm sure I can do this.
Like I say, I have done the homework in advance to make sure I'm not setting a ridiculous challenge with a dumb gotcha that I'll have to apologize for next time. And there's no gotcha. So this is an achievable challenge.
Okay, that sounds fun. All right, what are we doing next time then?
Okay, so next time we're going to learn about reusable snippets, because having the ability to not repeat ourselves is darn tootin' useful. And it's actually useful in two ways. So it's useful when we're in HTML mode, and it's also useful when we're in Markdown mode, because Markdown has limitations. And I immediately thought of you when I read the docs to remind myself what this feature can do. There is no Markdown for figures. There is Markdown for an image, but there is no Markdown for a figure. We can use reusable snippets to add proper figures to our content without having to write HTML tags. We can basically create a snippet called figure and pass it an argument of a file name and another argument of a caption, and then our little snippet can actually assemble the proper syntax for a nice figure.
So you know how Bart always talks about scratching your own itch? Sometimes Bart has to scratch my itch. There was a lesson, I don't know how long it was, probably 6 or 8 months ago, where I really wanted there to be titles underneath these images in one of the lessons that we were doing. And that's when I bet you learned how to do this.
Actually, no,
You're
I learned how
nodding
to
your
do
head
it
on an audio
badly
podcast.
then,
Oh,
but it worked.
oh,
And
okay.
as soon as I read these docs as I was planning ahead, I went, oh my God, that's the right solution. That's actually the
Ah.
right way to do it. I have to teach Alison this.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like me a figure. Everything on podfeet.com, basically every image I ever embed is a figure. It's always got a little title. It's always styled the same way because actually, to be honest, because Helma wrote the styling for me to make them look pretty.
Community effort.
Exactly. All right, that sounds fun. I look forward to me writing to you that I don't know how to do the challenge, but we'll hopefully we'll get into it.
If it helps, next weekend's a holiday weekend in Ireland, so you have a little bit more of me.
That might actually help.
Excellent. All right, folks. Well, until next time, lots and lots of happy computing.
If you learn as much from Bart each week as I do, I'd like you to go over to lets-talk.ie and press one of the buttons over there to help support him. He does 98% of the work here. I'm just the stooge that listens to him and asks the dumb questions. If you go over to lets-talk.ie, you can support him on Patreon, you can donate via PayPal, or you can use one of his referral links. I really hope you'll go over and help him out. In the meantime, you can contact me at Podfeet or check out all of the shows we do over there over at podfeet.com. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.